I moved into Maplewood Court in late October, just as the trees had finished shedding their amber leaves. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people exchanged polite nods but rarely conversations. My house, a modest two-story rental, sat between a retired couple on one side and a single man named Daniel Harper on the other. I first noticed something strange about Daniel on my third night in the house. It wasn't anything obvious, just a fleeting sense that something was off. He seemed like an ordinary guy, late 30s, unremarkable in dress and demeanor. We had only exchanged brief greetings, but nothing about him suggested the kind of bizarre mystery I was about to stumble into. It was sometime past midnight when I sat on my back porch, nursing a beer and scrolling aimlessly on my phone. The neighborhood was silent except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. That's when I saw it. Or rather, I saw him. Daniel was in his yard, pacing slowly, his posture stiff, as if he were listening for something. I was about to call out when I glanced at my watch, 2:59 a.m. And then, as I blinked, he was gone. No sound, no movement, just vanished. I froze, staring at the empty spot where he had just been. My mind scrambled for explanations. Had I imagined it? Had he ducked inside faster than I could see? My gut told me neither of those things were true. For a long moment, I sat in stunned silence. Then, forcing myself to move, I stood and walked to the fence that separated our yards. I leaned over, scanning the area, my heart hammering. Nothing. No sign of him. A cold unease settled over me. I barely slept that night. I woke up feeling groggy, my mind still tangled in the memory of what I had seen, or thought I had seen, the night before. The rational part of me tried to explain it away. Maybe Daniel had just moved out of my line of sight quickly. Maybe I had been tired, my brain filling in gaps where my eyes had failed me. But another part of me, the one that had felt that eerie silence settle over the yard after he vanished, wasn't so sure. As I stepped outside that morning, I glanced toward Daniel's house. His car was still in the driveway, just as it had been the night before. The curtains in his living room window were drawn, revealing nothing. I considered knocking on his door, but what would I even say? "Hey, weird question. Did you disappear into thin air last night?" Instead, I walked to my own mailbox, pretending to check for mail I knew wasn't there yet. That's when Daniel's front door creaked open. He stepped outside, stretching, looking well-rested and perfectly normal. He wore sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair slightly messy. No signs of distress, no indication that anything had happened. I hesitated, then forced a casual tone. "Morning." He blinked at me, then gave a slow nod. "Morning." I studied his face, searching for, I wasn't sure what. A clue? A hint that he knew? But he looked at me like he always did, like a neighbor exchanging polite pleasantries. I couldn't help myself. "You were out in your yard late last night," I said carefully. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Was I?" His voice was neutral, but something in his expression flickered, just for a moment. "Yeah," I said, "around 3 in the morning. I was out on my porch, and I thought I saw you." He frowned slightly, looking puzzled. Then he let out a soft chuckle. "I must have been sleepwalking or something. I don't remember being outside." I forced a smile, nodding as if that explanation made perfect sense. But inside, my unease deepened. Sleepwalking? Maybe. But people who sleepwalk don't vanish. "Guess I should set up a camera or something," Daniel joked, rubbing the back of his neck. "See if I start doing weird stuff in my sleep." I chuckled, though I didn't find it funny. "Yeah," I said, "maybe you should." But what I didn't tell him, what I couldn't tell him, was that I was already planning to set up a camera of my own. I needed to know what was happening at 3 a.m., and this time I would have proof. That night, I positioned my old security camera so it had a clear view of Daniel's yard. It wasn't high-tech, just a basic motion-activated model I had lying around, but it would do the job. I placed it behind a gap in my window blinds, ensuring it wasn't obvious. If something strange happened again, I'd have undeniable proof. I stayed up watching TV, phone in hand, but my attention kept drifting to the clock. Midnight. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. My heart began to pound as 3 a.m. approached. I moved to the window, careful not to be seen, and focused on Daniel's yard. And then, it happened again. 1 second, Daniel stood outside, motionless, staring at nothing. The next second, he was gone. No flash of light, no sound, no transition. One blink and he had vanished into thin air. I exhaled slowly, willing my hands to stay steady as I grabbed my phone. The camera had been recording the whole time. If I caught it on video, then this wasn't just in my head. I stopped the recording and pulled it up on my laptop. The footage played smoothly. Daniel walking outside just before 3 a.m., standing still, his posture rigid. Then, in an instant, he was gone. I rewound the footage, played it again, slowed it down. It was the same every time. No distortion, no motion blur, no explanation. Daniel Harper simply ceased to exist for a moment in time. I sat back, my pulse hammering. I wasn't crazy. I had proof. Now I just had to figure out what the hell to do with it. The next morning, I barely tasted my coffee. My mind was stuck in a loop of questions, none of which had answers. I considered calling someone, an expert, a scientist, hell, even a paranormal investigator. But who would believe me? Even if I showed them the footage, they'd say it was doctored. So I did the only thing I could do. I knocked on Daniel's door. A few seconds later, he answered, looking as normal as ever. "Hey," he said, running a hand through his hair. "What's up?" I hesitated. How the hell was I supposed to bring this up? "Can we talk?" I asked. Inside, Daniel frowned slightly but stepped aside. "Yeah, sure. Come in." His house was neat, lived in but not cluttered. A couch, a TV, a stack of unread mail on the coffee table. Nothing screamed this guy disappears at 3 a.m. every night. But then again, what would? I took a deep breath. "Daniel, do you ever wake up feeling off?" His brow furrowed. "Off how? Like maybe something happened to you, but you don't remember?" He let out a short laugh. "What, like sleep paralysis? Or missing time?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, exactly like that." He studied me for a second. "Why are you asking?" I exhaled and pulled out my phone. "I need to show you something." I played the footage. Daniel leaned in, watching as the screen showed him standing outside his house. Then gone. The blood drained from his face. "What the hell?" he whispered. I paused the video. "You don't remember this?" His mouth opened, then closed. He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't." He looked at me then, his expression a mixture of confusion and fear. "What does this mean?" I had no answer for him. All I knew was that something was very, very wrong. Daniel sat back on his couch, rubbing his temples as if trying to force a memory out of hiding. I don't understand," he muttered. "You're telling me I vanish? Every night?" I hesitated before nodding. At exactly 3 a.m. His breathing was shallow, his fingers tightening around the phone as he replayed the footage, over and over. Each time, the same result. One moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. "This has to be fake," he said finally. I sighed. "I knew you'd say that." His hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down. I don't feel like anything's happening to me. I go to bed. I wake up. That's it." "But it's not," I said. "Something is happening to you, and it's been happening every night." "How long? Weeks? Months? Your whole life?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I'd know." "Would you?" I countered. "If it happens the same way every time, if your mind resets every morning, how would you ever know?" His lips pressed into a thin line, and I could see the conflict in his expression. He wanted to dismiss it, but the footage, the undeniable proof, was eating away at his doubt. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "All right, then let's figure out what's happening." I hadn't realized how tense I was until he said that. "Okay," I said, "but we need to be smart about this." Daniel nodded. "Where do we start?" I didn't have a perfect answer, but I had an idea. "Tonight, I'm staying up," I told him. "I'm going to watch in real time, And this time, I won't just record from my house. I'll be right here, with you. Daniel's jaw tightened. And what if I just disappear? What do you do then? I didn't know, but I was going to find out. That night, I arrived at Daniel's house around 11 p.m. He had a bottle of whiskey on the table, already half empty. Drinking might not be the best idea, I told him. He shrugged. If I'm about to get erased from existence, I'd rather be a little buzzed when it happens. Fair enough. We settled into his living room, both of us pretending to watch TV but neither actually paying attention. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At 2:45, the air felt heavier. Maybe it was just my nerves, but the quiet seemed thicker, like the house itself was holding its breath. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I feel weird, he muttered. Weird how? I asked, sitting up. Like I know something's coming, but I don't know what. I checked my watch. 2:58 a.m. And then, as the seconds crept toward 3 a.m., Daniel's entire body stiffened. His breathing slowed. His gaze went distant, like he wasn't fully there anymore. Daniel, I said, my pulse spiking. He didn't respond. Then, he was gone. 1 second, he was sitting right in front of me. The next, the chair was empty. No noise. No movement. Just nothing. I shot to my feet, heart hammering. Daniel, I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. I had expected this, knew it was coming, but experiencing it up close was completely different from watching it on a screen. Daniel Harper had vanished. Now what? The silence inside Daniel's house was suffocating. My breathing sounded too loud, my own pulse like a drum in my ears. He was gone. Not just out of the room, not just hiding. Gone. I waved my hand through the empty space where he had been, half expecting to feel something. A shift in the air, a residue of whatever force had taken him. But there was nothing. For a long moment, I just stood there, my mind scrambling. Should I call someone? The police? A scientist? A priest? No one would believe me. Instead, I turned to what I knew, observation. I checked my watch. 3:01 a.m. Daniel had been gone for exactly 1 minute. I walked through his house, searching for any clue. Anything different now that he was gone. His phone still sat on the table. His half-empty whiskey glass remained untouched. I hesitated, then walked upstairs to his bedroom. The bed was unmade, blankets thrown aside as if he'd left them in a hurry. A framed photo on his nightstand caught my eye. A younger Daniel, maybe in his 20s, smiling with a woman I didn't recognize. I made a mental note to ask him about it later. If there was a later, I checked my watch again. 3:05 a.m. How long would he be gone? I returned to the living room, sat on the couch, and forced myself to wait. The minutes dragged by. 3:10, 3:20, 3:30. I kept expecting something to happen. A noise, a light, a sign. Nothing. Then, at 3:59 a.m., a strange feeling crept over me, like the atmosphere in the room had shifted, thickened. Somehow, the hairs on my arms stood on end. And then, Daniel reappeared. One blink and he was back in his chair. Same position, same clothes, his expression dazed, like someone waking from a deep sleep. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel, I whispered. He blinked slowly, looking around, disoriented. His eyes settled on me. What? His voice was groggy, like he had just woken up. You were gone, I told him. For an hour. His brow furrowed. No, I wasn't. I was just sitting here. I exhaled sharply. No, Daniel. You vanished. I saw it happen. I was here the whole time. He stared at me, then at the clock. His face paled. It's 4 in the morning, he whispered. I nodded. His breathing quickened. I don't remember anything. I grabbed my phone, pulling up the footage. Then watch. I played the recording. It showed everything, him sitting, then disappearing, then reappearing an hour later. His hands gripped the arms of the chair as he watched. This isn't possible, he muttered. This can't be real. But it was. And now he knew it. The question was, where was he going? And why didn't he remember? Daniel looked like he was going to be sick. His hands trembled as he replayed the footage over and over, as if watching it enough times would somehow force his mind to recall something. Anything. I was here, he muttered under his breath. I was just here. No, you weren't, I said quietly. You were somewhere else. He turned to me, his face pale. But where? Where do I go? I had no answer. He let out a shaky breath, running his fingers through his hair. Okay, all right, let's think. If this is happening every night, maybe there's, I don't know, something I bring back? A clue. That was a good thought. I scanned him up and down. His clothes looked exactly the same. No dirt, no tears, no signs of struggle. His skin was unmarked. No injuries, no dust, nothing unusual. I hesitated. Empty your pockets. Daniel blinked. What? Your pockets? Maybe you brought something back with you. He frowned but did as I asked, patting himself down. His phone was still on the table where he had left it. His keys were in his pocket. A crumpled receipt. Some loose change. Then he paused. His fingers brushed against something in his hoodie's front pocket. Something he hadn't expected. Slowly, he pulled it out. A small, smooth rock. We both stared at it. What the hell is that? I asked. Daniel turned it over in his palm. It was about the size of a golf ball, dark and polished, almost too smooth, like it had been worn down by time. It shimmered slightly in the dim light. I don't know, he murmured. I leaned in. Is it yours? He shook his head. I don't think so. We sat in silence, both staring at the strange object. It was the first real evidence that Daniel wasn't just vanishing into thin air. He was going somewhere. But where? And how had he brought this back without remembering? A chill ran down my spine. We were getting closer to the truth, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know it. Daniel barely spoke for the rest of the morning. After I left his house, I lay in bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. The image of that smooth, unnatural rock wouldn't leave my mind. Where had it come from? What did it mean? At some point, I must have dozed off, because when I woke up, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Daniel. We need to talk. Now. I threw on some clothes and walked next door. Daniel looked awful. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale. He hadn't slept. What happened? I asked. He swallowed hard. I had a dream. I frowned. A dream? His voice was hollow. No, not a dream. A memory. I felt my stomach drop. You remember something? He nodded slowly. Then, in a whisper, he said, I think I know where I go. I stared at him, my pulse spiking. Where? He hesitated, as if saying it out loud would make it real. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, There's a place. Dark, cold, like an endless fog. His hands trembled. I wasn't alone. There were others, but they weren't. He cut himself off, squeezing his eyes shut. I stepped closer. Daniel, what did you see? His breathing was uneven now, his hands gripping the edges of the table. They weren't alive, he whispered. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? I asked. Daniel slowly lifted his gaze to meet mine. His expression filled with something I'd never seen before. Pure, unfiltered terror. They were waiting for me, he whispered, and they knew my name. Daniel sat there, gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. His breath was shallow, his eyes distant, like he was still trapped in whatever nightmare he had glimpsed. I swallowed hard. Daniel, tell me everything. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, like he was afraid of being overheard. It wasn't a dream, he whispered. I'm sure of it. It was real. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him. What did you see? Daniel exhaled shakily. It was like I was standing in nothingness. A fog so thick I could barely see my own hands, but I could feel things moving around me. Shapes, Shadows, too far away to see, but there. I shivered. And the voices? He nodded slowly. They were whispering, low at first like a breeze, but then they got louder. They weren't speaking English. Not at first. Not at first, I echoed. His fingers tightened around the rock he had pulled from his pocket earlier. At some point, the whispers changed. They started saying my name. He looked up at me, his expression haunted. They knew me. A chill crawled up my spine. What did they want? I asked. Daniel hesitated. His eyes darted to the darkened window, as if checking to make sure nothing was watching us. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, they wanted me to stay. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I tried to process what he was saying. Every night at exactly 3 a.m., Daniel vanished from this world. Not just disappeared, he went somewhere dark, somewhere full of things that spoke his name, somewhere that wanted him to never come back. I exhaled, my mind racing. Okay, I said finally. We need more proof. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. More proof? I vanish into thin air. I bring back something that doesn't belong here, and I'm remembering things that shouldn't exist. What more do we need? I leaned forward. We need to find out why this is happening, and if there's a way to stop it. Daniel met my gaze, and for the first time since this all started, I saw something in his eyes besides fear. Determination. All right, he said. Tonight, we find out the truth. If we were going to figure out what was happening to Daniel, we needed to be prepared. We gathered everything we could think of, multiple cameras, an audio recorder, a notepad for any observations. I even brought a small digital clock to place next to Daniel, to see if time worked the same way in wherever he went. Daniel, meanwhile, had an idea of his own. I want to try something, he said, holding up a marker. I frowned. What's that for? If I disappear again, I'm going to leave a message, he said. Something to see if I can communicate across, wherever the hell I go. I nodded. Good idea. By 2:30 a.m., we had everything set up in his living room. Cameras were positioned at different angles, one focused directly on him, another covering the entire room. The audio recorder was running. We sat in silence as the minutes crept by. 2:45, 2:50, 2:55. The air grew heavy. Daniel's breathing slowed. 2:59. He picked up the marker, uncapped it, and pressed it to the back of his hand. Here goes nothing, he muttered. 3 a.m. And then, he was gone. I sucked in a sharp breath. It didn't matter how many times I saw it happen. It was wrong. Watching a person simply cease to exist defied every natural law I understood. The room felt eerily still. I checked the cameras. They were still recording. The clock beside Daniel's chair kept ticking. Then, a sound made me freeze. A low, distant whisper. It wasn't coming from my side of the room. It was coming from the audio recorder. My fingers trembled as I leaned forward, eyes locked on the device. The whisper grew louder, forming words I didn't understand. But then, through the static and distortion, I heard my own name. The whispering on the audio recorder sent a bolt of ice through my spine. My name. They had said my name. I stared at the recorder, heart hammering, barely able to breathe. Daniel was gone, but something on the other side knew I was here. My shaking hands reached for the recorder. I rewound the last few seconds and pressed play. First, it was just static. A faint, low murmuring, like wind through dead trees. Then, "We see you." The voice was warped, stretched, almost wrong, like it wasn't meant to be heard by human ears. I nearly dropped the recorder. I forced myself to listen again. The words were barely decipherable, but they were there. "We see you." I slammed the recorder down on the table and took a shaky breath. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. I wasn't just an observer. Now they knew I existed too. I tried to calm down, focusing on the clock beside Daniel's empty chair. 3:12 a.m. He had been gone for 12 minutes. How long would he stay this time? I checked the cameras. The footage showed exactly what had happened. Daniel sitting in his chair, uncapping the marker. Then, nothing. No transition. No fade out. Just gone. Then, the marker, which had been in his hand, clattered onto the floor a second after he disappeared. I frowned. I hadn't noticed that before. I grabbed the marker and turned it over in my hand. The tip was pressed in slightly, like it had been dragged against something. Something he had written on. My eyes darted to the chair. No markings. The table. Nothing. Then I looked at the back of my own hand. A single word was scrawled in black ink, written in messy, frantic strokes. Run. The room felt like it had just dropped 10 degrees. I stared at the word, my pulse thundering in my ears. Daniel had written this, but why? And more importantly, was I already too late? I sat frozen, staring at my hand. Run. Did he mean leave? Run away? Or was this just some fragmented memory? A desperate attempt to communicate something from the other side? I didn't know, and I wouldn't know until Daniel came back. I forced myself to wait, counting the seconds, watching the clock tick forward. 3:30 a.m., 3:45, 3:58. Then, exactly at 4 a.m., the atmosphere in the room changed. The air thickened, humming with something unseen. And then, Daniel was back. He gasped loudly, his body jerking forward as if he had been thrown into the chair. His eyes darted around wildly before landing on me. "You're still here," he choked out, his voice hoarse. I swallowed hard. "Of course I'm still here. Daniel, what happened?" He looked down at his hands, then at the marker still clutched in my grip. Then his eyes found the writing on my skin. His face drained of color. "You saw it," he whispered. I nodded. "You wrote this while you were gone. What does it mean?" Daniel was shaking now, his entire body trembling as if he had just stepped out of a freezing storm. He stopped, his breathing uneven. I tried to warn you, but they wouldn't let me." My blood ran cold. Who wouldn't let you?" His gaze flickered to the darkened window. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They know you're watching now, and they don't like it." Daniel wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes darted around the room like he expected something to be there. I felt it too, a pressure in the air, a sense that we weren't alone anymore. "They know you're watching now," Daniel had said, "and they don't like it." I forced myself to stay calm. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what do you mean? Who are they?" His breathing was unsteady. He rubbed his arms like he was trying to shake off a deep cold. "They weren't human," he whispered. "They stood like us, but they weren't right. Their limbs were too long. Their mouths," he shuddered violently. "Too many teeth." My stomach twisted. He lifted his trembling hands and covered his ears. The whispers, they were inside my head. Not just sounds, words, voices. They didn't stop. They kept saying things, telling me. He broke off suddenly. I leaned forward. "Telling you what?" Daniel swallowed hard. "That I don't belong here." A chill ran down my spine. "Here? You mean there?" But Daniel's eyes met mine, his expression hollow. "No," he murmured. "Here, in this world." A heavy silence fell over the room. I exhaled, trying to process what he was saying. "That doesn't make any sense. You were born here, Daniel. You've lived here your whole life." He shook his head. "I don't know. I don't know anymore." His fingers dug into his temples. "But when I was there, it was like I could remember something buried deep, like I used to know them." I stared at him. Daniel had no reason to lie, no reason to imagine any of this. But what he was saying, it went beyond just vanishing every night. He was starting to believe he wasn't supposed to be here at all. I opened my mouth to say something, to try to ground him in reality. Then something outside the window moved. A shadow, tall, wrong. Daniel's breath hitched, his eyes flickering toward the glass. "You saw that too," he whispered. My body went rigid. Slowly, I turned to face the window. The street was empty, the neighborhood still, but something had been there. I was sure of it. And for the first time since this had started, I wasn't sure if Daniel was the only one being watched. I locked the doors, closed the blinds, checked every room. Nothing. No sign of whatever had been out there, but the uneasy feeling lingered, thick as fog. Daniel sat on the couch, gripping the strange rock he had brought back from the void. He turned it over in his hands, staring at it like it held answers. "We need to stop this," I said finally. "This isn't just some sleepwalking incident. You're being taken somewhere. And now, something from there is looking back at us." Daniel didn't respond. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to think. "We need help. Someone who can actually understand what's happening." Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "And who the hell would that be?" He wasn't wrong. Who the hell could we even go to for something like this? The police? They'd laugh us out of the station. A doctor? This was way beyond medical science. Maybe a paranormal investigator? I suggested hesitantly. Daniel scoffed. "You think some YouTube ghost hunter is gonna help me?" I sighed. "I don't know, Daniel, but something has to change. This is getting worse." He was about to say something when... Knock, knock, knock. Both of us froze. The sound echoed through the house, 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Daniel and I exchanged a look. It was 4:13 a.m. Who the hell would be knocking at this hour? I hesitated, then stood up. "Stay here." Daniel grabbed my wrist. His grip was like ice, his eyes wide, terrified. "Don't open it," he whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "Why not?" Daniel swallowed. His voice was barely audible when he said, "Because I think they followed me back." The knocks came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, heavy, purposeful. I didn't move. Neither did Daniel. We just sat there, frozen, staring at the front door like it was a loaded gun. Who would be here at 4 in the morning? I whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. His knuckles were white as he gripped the arm of the couch. "It's not someone," he murmured. "It's them." My stomach twisted. "You don't know that." But the look he gave me said otherwise. Some part of him did know. I forced myself to move, stepping toward the door as quietly as I could. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I reached for the peephole, hesitated, took a slow, deep breath. Then I looked. First, I saw nothing. Just the darkened porch, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows. The road was empty. The night was still. Then I saw it. Something, standing just outside the porch light's reach. Not close enough for me to make out details, but tall, unnaturally tall. My throat went dry. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My gut screamed at me to not open the door. I turned away from the peephole, backing away slowly. Daniel was still on the couch, his breathing shallow. "Is it there?" he whispered. I nodded. His hands trembled. "Then it knows." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. Another knock. This one louder, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What do we do?" Daniel exhaled shakily. "We wait." "For what?" He looked at me, his expression hollow. "For it to go away." I wanted to believe him, but somehow I knew it wasn't going to leave. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. The knocking didn't come again, but neither of us moved. Finally, after what felt like hours, I checked the time. 4:45 a.m. Daniel looked at me. "Is it gone?" I hesitated, then slowly walked back to the door. My fingers trembled as I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty. The street was silent. "I think it's gone," I whispered. Daniel let out a breath of relief. His shoulders slumped. "Good." But then, from somewhere deep in the house, a sound, scratching sound. A long, slow scratch against the wall. Not from outside, from inside the house. My blood ran cold. Daniel sat up, his body stiff. "Did you hear that?" I nodded slowly, my mouth dry. Then it came again. The scratching, closer this time, like something was dragging its nails along the walls. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. Then, the lights flickered, and from the hallway just beyond the living room, a whisper, low, distorted. Daniel. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath. My whole body went numb, because that voice, it didn't sound human. The whisper sent a bolt of pure ice down my spine. Daniel. It dragged the syllables out like it was testing the name, rolling it around its throat. Daniel was frozen, his entire body rigid. His fingers dug into the fabric of the couch, his breathing shallow. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The scratching on the walls had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. Then, slow and deliberate, footsteps crept down the hall. Not heavy like a person's, but slow, unnatural, like something long and thin was dragging itself forward. I forced myself to speak. Daniel. He snapped his head toward me, eyes wide and wild. Don't move. The lights flickered again. My throat tightened. Daniel, we can't just. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard. Do not move. The footsteps stopped. A heavy, stretching silence filled the room. Then, scratching. Something dragged its fingers along the wall right outside the living room. It was in the house, and it was waiting. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to breathe slowly, evenly. My whole body screamed at me to run, to bolt out the front door and never look back. But Daniel was rigid, his head tilted slightly, listening. It was like he knew something I didn't. Daniel, I whispered, barely moving my lips. What is it? His grip on my wrist tightened. I think, he swallowed. I think it's one of them. My stomach twisted. One of what? He slowly turned his head toward me. His voice was barely a breath when he whispered, the things from the fog. A cold shiver rippled through me. They had followed him back. I clenched my fists, forcing my brain to work through the panic. Can it see us? Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know, but if we move, it'll hear. A fresh wave of fear rolled through me, so we sat there, frozen, listening. For a long, agonizing moment, the house was silent. Then, a new sound. Soft, wet, drip, drip. A slow, rhythmic dripping sound. My eyes darted toward the ceiling, then the hallway. Something was leaking. Then I saw it. A dark stain on the floor just beyond the living room entrance. It wasn't water. It was black, thick, oily, and it was spreading. I sucked in a shaky breath. Daniel, I whispered. It's leaving something behind. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing as he spotted the growing puddle. Then, something moved in the darkness. A shape, shifting just beyond the doorway. My heart seized. Daniel's fingers dug into my arm. Whatever happens, he whispered, do not let it touch you. The puddle of black liquid seeped forward, inch by inch, creeping toward us like it was alive. Daniel and I didn't move, didn't breathe. From the darkness of the hall, the thing shifted again. I still couldn't see it fully, only glimpses of its shape in the flickering light. And that was the part that terrified me most. Because every time the light blinked out and came back, the shape was different. Too tall, then too wide. A head that bent at the wrong angle. Then too many heads. It was trying to be something, trying to decide what it should be. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to run, to move, to do something, but every instinct in my body screamed that if I did, it would know exactly what I was. The air in the room felt thick. The black liquid slithered forward another inch. Daniel's breath hitched. It hurt him. The thing twisted unnaturally. Then it spoke. A garbled, warping voice, like static on an old radio, layered with something else. You are not whole. I choked back a whimper, took another step forward. Daniel's whole body was trembling. You do not belong. The voice wasn't directed at me. It was talking to Daniel. His hands clenched into fists. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, breath shaky. Daniel, I whispered. The thing snapped its head toward me. It heard me. A thick, wet, gurgling noise rattled in its throat. I grabbed Daniel's arm. We have to go. Now. He didn't move. His body was stiff, his face pale. His mouth moved wordlessly, like he was hearing something I wasn't. I yanked him hard. "Daniel, snap out of it." His eyes focused like I had just pulled him out of a trance. And in that moment, the thing lunged. The thing lunged. A sickening, wet noise filled the air as its shifting mass launched forward, faster than I thought possible. I yanked Daniel back just as a black, clawed limb slammed into the couch where he had been sitting. The entire piece of furniture jerked forward, as if something impossibly strong had dragged it. Daniel gasped, his trance shattered. His eyes snapped to mine, wild with fear. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted. Daniel stumbled, his body still sluggish from whatever hold the thing had on him. I grabbed his arm and hauled him up, dragging him toward the front door. Behind us, the thing screeched, a horrible, distorted sound that made my ears ache. I threw myself at the door, twisting the lock with slippery fingers. It wouldn't turn. No. I yanked again. The door wouldn't budge. "It's locked," I gasped, trying to wrench it open. Daniel spun, his back pressed against mine. His breath was ragged. "It's not just locked," he whispered. "It won't let us leave." I turned just in time to see the thing unfold itself from the shadows of the hallway. Its limbs were too long now, its shape stretching and twisting as if it was still trying to decide what to be. But its eyes, I gasped. I hadn't seen them before, because it didn't have any. Just two empty, black voids in the shifting mass of its face. Hollow, endless. Took a step forward. Then another. The black liquid seeped from its form, trailing across the floor. Daniel grabbed my arm. "The back door," he gasped. "Go!" We sprinted. The thing screamed. The lights exploded. Glass shattered around us as we ran through the kitchen, my feet sliding on the linoleum. Daniel shoved the back door, but it wouldn't open. "It won't let us out," Daniel cried. I grabbed the nearest object, a chair, and swung it into the glass window next to the door. It shattered. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed Daniel and shoved him through the opening. He hit the ground hard, coughing. I scrambled after him, feeling sharp glass slice my palms, but I didn't care. We were outside. We were out. We ran. Neither of us looked back. We didn't stop until we were in the middle of the street, gasping for breath, watching the house. The front door was wide open now, and from the darkness inside, the whisper came again. "Daniel!" We didn't go back inside. Not that night. Not ever. Daniel was shaking, his hands gripping his own arms so tightly his nails dug into his skin. His pupils were still blown wide, his breath unsteady. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, what the hell was that?" He didn't answer, because he was still listening. The way his head was slightly tilted, the way his fingers twitched, like he could still hear something I couldn't. I swallowed hard. "Daniel!" His breath hitched, his eyes met mine, and in a broken, horrified whisper, he said, "They're still talking to me." My stomach twisted. I looked back at the house. The door stood open, yawning into blackness. The night was still, too still. And then, Daniel shuddered. His hands flew to his ears. His knees buckled. "They won't stop," he gasped. "I can still hear them." I grabbed him. "What are they saying?" He looked at me, terror written across every inch of his face. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They're telling me I'm not done." A cold weight settled in my chest. "Not done with what?" I asked. Daniel shook his head frantically. His hands trembled. Then his breath hitched. He went still, like something had just spoken directly into his mind. "Oh God," he whispered. A horrible realization washed over his face. I gripped his arms. "Daniel, what is it?" He turned to me. His expression was one of pure, unfiltered horror. And then he said it, the words that made my blood turn to ice. "They're not here for me anymore." He swallowed hard. His fingers dug into my wrist. "They're here for you." I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. "They're here for me?" Daniel's grip on my wrist tightened, his breathing uneven. He gave a shaky nod. "I don't I don't know how, but I can hear them. They're whispering inside my head. They're saying, they don't want me anymore. My pulse hammered against my skull. What does that mean? Daniel swallowed hard. It means they found something better. His voice broke. It means they want you now. I took a step back, shaking my head. No, that doesn't make sense. I haven't vanished. I haven't been there. Daniel's expression twisted. But you've seen too much. You watched. You noticed. And now they notice you. The weight of those words settled over me like a suffocating fog. I turned, staring at the open door of Daniel's house. The darkness inside looked wrong. It didn't feel like just an empty house. It felt like a gateway, a bridge between here and there. And then, a whisper curled through the air. Not from Daniel's house, not from inside my head, from right behind me. I turned. The street was empty. The night was still. But something was watching, a force I couldn't see, couldn't touch, but I could feel it, pressing against the edges of reality, slipping through cracks in the air like a spider through a web. Daniel's breath hitched. They're offering a trade. I ripped my gaze away from the shadows. What? Daniel's eyes were distant, unfocused, like he wasn't entirely here anymore. They're saying they'll let me go. They'll stop taking me, if you go instead. A cold chill wrapped around my spine. No, I said immediately. That's not happening. Daniel's expression twisted into something between relief and guilt. I told them you wouldn't agree. The air around us shifted, like something was displeased. A low vibration hummed in my ears, too deep to be a sound, more like a feeling crawling through my bones. Then, the streetlights flickered out, every single one. The world plunged into blackness, and from that darkness, something moved. Panic flared in my chest. The air felt thick, like something was pressing against me from all sides. Daniel, I whispered, we need to. Then I heard it. Footsteps, coming closer, not from the house, not from the street, from everywhere. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath. They're coming. I turned, trying to see anything in the dark, but my own breath felt too loud, my heartbeat a deafening drum in my ears. Stay close, I hissed. Daniel grabbed my wrist, his grip like ice. They want an answer. What answer? I snapped. I already said no. Daniel's breathing was shallow. I don't think they care. Then all at once, a chorus of whispers filled the air. Not words, not sounds, something deeper. A feeling of something old, something that had been waiting a long, long time. And then, a single voice rose above the rest. It didn't come from one place, came from everywhere at once. Choose. The word ripped through me like a blade. I gasped, doubling over, my head pounding with the force of it. Daniel fell to his knees, hands clutching his temples. Choose. Their voices demanded it. I squeezed my eyes shut. Choose what? The answer came like a whisper against my ear. You, or him. The darkness swirled around us, waiting, watching. Daniel's breathing was ragged, his hands still clutching his head. He lifted his gaze to mine. His eyes were wide, wild. They're not going to stop, he whispered. If we don't choose, they'll take us both. I clenched my fists. We don't have to play their game. Daniel gave a weak, bitter laugh. Do you think we have a choice? I swallowed hard. My mind was racing. Think. If I chose Daniel, they would take him forever. If I chose myself, would I even come back? I looked at him, really looked at him. He was broken, exhausted, barely hanging on. If I let him keep going through this, it would destroy him. But I couldn't just let them take me. I had to find another way. I straightened, sucking in a breath. You want a choice? I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Then I choose neither. The whispers stopped. The air went still. The darkness seemed to recoil, shifting, as if confused. Daniel's eyes widened. What are you doing? They want a trade? I said, my voice rising. Then they can make one. With me. A low, rumbling sound rippled through the void around us. Not quite a growl, not quite a word, but an acknowledgement. "You want me?" I said, stepping forward. "Then we make a deal. No more taking people. No more vanishing. No more whispers. You stop this, and I come to you willingly." Daniel grabbed my arm. "Are you insane?" I ignored him. The shadows swirled. The whispers hissed. Then, a voice. Not loud. Not a whisper. Something deep, like it was inside me. Agreed. The darkness collapsed inward. A force ripped through me, yanking me forward, and the last thing I heard was Daniel screaming my name. The world ripped away. 1 second, I was standing in the street. The next, silence. Not the silence of an empty room. Not the quiet of the dead of night. This was absence. A hollow, crushing stillness where even my own breath felt wrong. I opened my eyes. Fog. Thick, endless, pressing in from every direction. Curled around me like fingers, damp and freezing. The air smelled wrong. Not like smoke or damp earth, but something old. Like the dust of a forgotten place. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding. There was no ground beneath me, no sky above, only the fog. And then, I wasn't alone. Shapes moved in the mist. Tall, thin, wrong. I felt my stomach twist. They weren't walking. They were drifting. Their limbs moving unnaturally, like they weren't bound by human motion. My breath hitched. They were coming closer. I took a step back. My foot made no sound. The fog swallowed everything. And then, the whispers returned. Not distant, not outside, inside my head. "You came willingly." The words weren't spoken. They were felt. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay steady. That was the deal. A low, crackling sound rippled through the mist. Laughter. Deals are not gifts. The fog shifted, revealing something ahead. A structure. A towering, impossible thing half hidden in the mist. I couldn't tell if it was made of stone or bone. Its surface twisted and pulsated as if alive. The whispers thickened. "Come." I swallowed hard. My body screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. I took a step forward, then another. The figures in the mist followed, always just at the edges of my vision. And as I approached the towering structure, I realized something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't built. It was grown. And as I stood beneath its impossible height, I saw the door was already open, waiting for me. I stepped inside. The whispers grew louder, circling my mind like vultures. I forced myself to breathe, to stay steady. If I panicked now, I was done. The inside of the structure was worse than the outside. The walls moved, not constantly, just enough that I never fully trusted them to stay where they were. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. And then, I saw them, the others, standing in the darkness, just beyond the shifting walls. They weren't people anymore. They had been, once. Now they were warped, their faces stretched, their limbs unnaturally long. Hollowed-out versions of something that had once been human. I staggered back. My pulse thundered in my ears. One of them turned toward me. Its face was wrong. Too wide, too hollow, its mouth filled with rows of teeth that didn't belong. Then, it spoke. Not in a whisper, not in a growl, in a voice that was horribly, painfully familiar. "Daniel." My body locked up. "No," I whispered. The thing took a step forward. "Daniel," it said again. But it wasn't talking about Daniel Harper. It was talking about me. My name wasn't mine. The whispers tightened around my mind. Memories I didn't recognize surfaced. Flashes of places I had never been, things I had never done. My stomach churned. I had always known Daniel Harper, but I had never asked. Who was I? The figures in the dark watched, and the whispering never stopped. The thing wearing my face took another step forward. Its mouth split wider, the rows of teeth stretching into something that shouldn't be possible. And it kept saying my name. "Daniel." No, not Daniel. Not me. The whispers curled through my mind, thick and suffocating. Memories that weren't mine pushed to the surface. A different house, a different life, a different person. I staggered back, clutching my head. My own thoughts were being unraveled, pulled apart like loose thread. Who was I? The walls of the shifting structure groaned, pulsing like something alive. The whispering grew sharper. You were never meant to be. I gasped, gripping the sides of my head. My body felt wrong, like I wasn't fully here anymore. The figures in the dark moved closer. You were a mistake. No, I whispered. That's not true. But something deep inside me, something buried and forgotten, knew they weren't lying. You were meant to be replaced. I choked back a cry. That's not true. The fog shifted, revealing something new. A door, but not just any door. My front door, the one from my house. The house I had lived in my entire life. But had I always lived there? The whispers coiled tighter, their voices dripping with malice. A mistake trying to become real. My breath hitched. The thing wearing my face took another step forward, and I finally understood. I was never supposed to exist. The door stood before me, impossibly real. I turned, my pulse hammering, staring at the thing wearing my face. It wasn't just mimicking me, it was what I should have been. Daniel was never the one who was meant to disappear. I was somewhere. Something had gone wrong. The trade they had made, the deal that had been broken, had left me here in this world, pretending to be something that should have never existed. The whispers tightened around my mind, dragging up memories that weren't mine. A different Daniel, a different life, a moment when I had been taken before. But something had brought me back. Something had saved me, and now the fog wanted to correct the mistake. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. This was it. They were going to erase me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then, a voice cut through the whispers. Get away from him. Daniel. The real Daniel. My eyes snapped open. He was standing in the mist, his body shaking but his expression defiant. You don't get to decide who belongs, he shouted. You don't get to take him. The whispers howled. The figures in the fog lurched forward. Daniel ran to me, grabbing my arm. You're real, he whispered. You're real. I don't care what they say. I don't care what's true. You belong here. The thing wearing my face snarled. Its body split apart, limbs twisting, mouth opening too wide. And then, Daniel shoved me through the door. I hit the ground hard. The breath was knocked out of me. My vision swam. For a second, I thought I was still there, still in the fog. Then, the smell of wood, coffee, rain. I gasped. I was back. My house, my living room. The streetlights outside flickered, humming softly. I scrambled to my feet. Daniel! I choked out. Silence. I spun around. The door was gone. It had vanished, like it had never been there. My breath hitched. No. No, no, no. I grabbed at the wall, my fingers digging into solid wood. The door was gone, and so was Daniel. Days passed, then weeks. Nobody remembered Daniel Harper. Nobody remembered the house next door ever belonging to anyone, like he had never existed at all. I tried to find him. I never did. But some nights, I wake up at exactly 3 a.m., and the air feels wrong, like something is just beyond my vision, waiting. And sometimes, I hear a whisper, a voice I know, a voice I will never forget. Run.